Tonight, we step beyond the threshold of the known into the deeper current of wisdom, older than kings, older than temples, older even than memory. For hidden beneath the surface of modern life is a sacred rhythm, the slow, breathing pulse of the earth herself. It is in the rustling of the oak leaves, the flow of hidden springs, the whisper of the stars across a black sky. This is the path the Druids once walked. This is the wisdom we seek to remember. Tonight, we are honored to sit with a master of that wisdom, an initiate of ancient mysteries, a guide through the cycles of nature and spirit, and a voice calling us back to a sacred way of being. His works, from the Druidry Handbook to the Mysteries of Merlin, speak not merely to the mind, but to the spirit. They are the maps for seekers ready to leave behind the illusions of power, technology, and endless striving, and to rediscover the sacred silence, the hidden light, and the living spirit within all things. Tonight, we open a nematon of spirit, a sacred grove here and now. We call the Awen, the flowing inspiration of the divine, and we invite you, listener, to join us at this crossroads, to listen deeply, to question bravely, and perhaps to remember something your soul has known since before your first breath. John Michael Greer, welcome to Brothers of the Arcana.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And yeah, that's how'd I do?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. The one slight quibble that I have is that I'm not calling anyone back. I'm calling them forward. I'm calling them to where they are now. Nature is not like something that's somewhere way back in the past. That's part of our mythology of progress. We could talk about that as we go. It's all around us right now. It's in us. Our bodies are part of nature. Our minds and spirits are part of nature. It's just that some of us are more clueless than others about paying attention to such little points.
Absolutely, and I am more clueless than most. So with that as an idea,
trust me, don't be too sure of that. We're all clueless. We're all clueless in this game.
Yeah, isn't it the idea that the more you know, the less you actually, or the more you figure out that you actually don't know anything?
That's why Socrates had the reputation of the wisest person in Greece. He used to say that nobody actually knows anything, but I'm one of the very few people who are aware of that fact.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Well, we'll do a quick shout out to our friend and brother Daniel Scatone, DRI of the 10th District of New Jersey Freemasonry, who was a huge fan of John Michael Greer. So he was very excited that we're going to have you on the show today. And he's one of the greatest ritualists of the state, even though he's a young guy.
Sweet.
He's in his mid to late 30s, and he's really taken to that level of... But one of the things we talk about a lot is the fact that people can be amazing masters of recognizing and understanding ritual without ever really understanding ritual at all, and just kind of getting it under your belt and understanding that that's okay. Well, I'm really good at memorizing this and that, but what about actually living it? What about understanding it? I mean, that was one of the things that you said led to some level of frustration for you with the fraternity, in terms of guys who are not as esoteric as might otherwise be the case.
Well, the thing is, I want to draw a distinction here, because there's an intellectual understanding of the ritual, and then there's a non-intellectual understanding of the ritual. I've known Brother Masons who were literally some of the best men I have ever met in my life. They didn't have an intellectual bone in their body. They were not esoterically inclined in any sense. You don't sit down and talk to them about the Kabbalah or what have you. But did they grasp the ritual, the meanings of the ritual on a gut level? Were they much better people? Were they better men than me? Yes. And so I think it's important to realize that there are many ways to approach, if you will. Here's the symbolic temple of the mysteries, and there are many different ways to approach it. And the way of the mind, of mental contemplation, of study, the kind of thing that I do so much of myself, that's one of the ways, and it's a very important way, but it's not the only game in town.
Okay.
Well, part of the reason, if I rabbit on just a little further on this, part of the reason why The ritual is presented the way it is. It's presented, as a symbolic drama. You don't sit down and study a document saying something. You go through this experience and you repeat this experience every time you witness or take part in the ritual. It's because it teaches in a different way, a way that is not intellectual, and that I think is one of the reasons the craft has remained, has survived all of the various pressures that have squeezed out so much else. Is that it has that non-intellectual, non-rational way of passing on its teachings, and that gives it a strength that a purely intellectual approach doesn't always have.
You get at something very interesting here, and that's the idea of the exoteric versus the esoteric, right? We've spoken about this with Chuck Dunning, who's a friend of yours and a friend of ours, of course, and a couple of other guys who we really enjoyed chatting with. Well, there's a reason why. Okay, so let's start with the idea of guarding the West Gate, because that's come up a lot. And of course, what I mean, but for those that don't, guarding the West Gate means being very choosy about who gets to come into an organization and who doesn't. And of course, people, especially in the modern day, will get up in arms about, well, wow, everybody should be in everything. How dare you keep anybody out? And why would you? And, and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to get something done, if you're trying to, especially something that has pitfalls like magic, like anything spiritual, you're going to encounter folks who are fly-by-nighters. You're going to encounter folks who are not as serious. You're going to encounter folks that are way too serious and way out of touch and falling off the deep end on the other side. So I guess the larger question is, what is a good modicum of understanding of how one should be watching the West Gate, and what's a good rule of thumb, or what's something to keep in mind?
That's a tough one. That's a really tough one, because on the one hand, you want somebody who's going to be receptive to the teachings, however they're receptive to it, whether they approach it in an intellectual way, in an emotional way, in an experiential way, or what have you. On the other hand, we are all of us fallible. And, we have all been through the experience. Every Mason who's been in the craft for more than a fairly modest period of time has experienced somebody who was really gung-ho and who came in and who joined and went through at least the first degree, and then just kind of drifted away because it didn't touch them at all. So since we don't have omniscience, we don't have the capacity to look into other people's souls. It's always going to be a crapshoot. It's always going to be a process of filtering and a process of making mistakes and learning from mistakes. And on the one hand, there are the people out there who insist, no, any restriction is bad. You should let in people who are deliberately saying, yes, we're here to rip you off. And then you have people who are saying nobody should be let in unless they're already perfect, and thus the craft will dwindle and die. And of course, that's happened to the thing is that's happened to many esoteric organizations, and it's happened to lodges. I know of lodges where the brothers, you have a little knot of brethren who just decide they're not going to let anyone else in. They have their nice little circle of friends and brothers, and they get old and die, and the charter gets picked up, and that's the end of it. And so you have this, here are the two guardians of the path, the two pillars, if you will, that you have to walk your way through. Being too lenient, being too severe.
That's very good. Very interestingly said. We spoke a little bit offline about the idea, and Dave and I have gone public about our Martinist membership. We did an episode on OM, which is our particular lineage. And what we found was very interesting that, being a part of a really esoteric organization like a Martinist branch organization, solved some problems for us that we came across in Freemasonry. The stuff that we were hoping to get in Freemasonry, esoteric wise and such, and we sort of found there. That's not to say that that's for everybody or everybody would have that experience. But what do you think? Let's put it this way. What do you think is, because I wanted to get into a further esoteric thing in a broader sense of Western esotericism, but let's just go with, what is the craft there for in the modern day? What is the purpose of Masonry?
Okay. That is, you like hardball questions. I like this. Okay. My take, I'm going to use a metaphor that was much used 100 years ago in some of the old Western occult schools whose teachings I've studied. Okay. There's the idea of the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. Okay. And the lesser mysteries are preparatory. They are typically moral or ethical in nature, although they do teach some of the deeper material, but they brush against it. But you need to pass through the lesser mysteries before you can proceed to the greater mysteries. Now, some of the old occult schools were set up that way. In the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, for example, the Outer Order, the Golden Dawn itself, was intended to be a school of the lesser mysteries. It was only if you proved yourself after that you didn't even know going that there was an inner order. But after you went through, you passed through the various degrees of the outer order, then somebody tapped you on the shoulder and said, you can go further, as long as you're willing not to talk about it to anybody else. And then you go into the inner order, the RSAC, and proceed to get all of the extremely complex occult teachings that they have. In a very real sense, for the last 300 years or so, Freemasonry has served as the Western world's premier school of the lesser mysteries. Men have joined the craft, have had the kind of lessons in morality, lessons in ethics, lessons in certain aspects of symbolic philosophy. And then, think of the number of Western occultists, male occultists, who were Masons. And very often what happened, they joined the Masonic craft. They got active in that. And then one of the old brethren came, let's go talk. And then all of a sudden they find themselves invited to join one of the Martinist orders, or they were invited to join the Fratres Lucis, or they were invited to join the Golden Dawn, or they're invited to join many of these other schools. Or OTO, or the Church of Satan, all those good stuff.
Actually,
I don't recall, on the one hand, I don't recall anybody from the Church of Satan who was a Mason.
No, I don't think so either.
Absolutely not.
As for the OTO, how far do you want to get down that particular rabbit hole? Because it goes into some other unsavory places.
Listen, John, we're going to go right at Thelma and Louise right off the cliff here. Absolutely. Let's do it, man.
Okay.
So that's what makes for good podcasting.
Exactly.
Okay. Then buckle yourself up. One of the things that nobody likes to talk about is that until after the Second World War, there was an entire world of quote initiatory orders that were sex clubs. That's what they were.
Oh, there still are. Look at that Order of the Magi, right, and a bunch of other ones that are in that vein.
Yeah. Well, this was there. You have to remember in the Victorian period when this whole thing got going. If you were a woman of the the respectable classes and you wanted to have cheap sex, you were in real trouble because any guy could blackmail you. Men could have all the cheap sex they wanted and not have any trouble at all. But women who did, they could be socially destroyed by just the rumor. So there was all kinds of ugly things that happened. The sex cult was a solution to that because it would destroy a man's reputation just as much if word got out that they belonged to a deviant religious body. And so the OTO and Whisper This Please Wicca are among the organizations that started out as sex clubs disguised as esoteric orders. There were many of them. There were dozens and dozens of organizations and a lot of independent bodies that just, people did this. Mutually assured social destruction as a way of facilitating, casual sex.
Wait a second. Did you just say Wicca started as a sex cult?
Yeah, Wicca was a sex club. Gerald Gardner organized it, and he liked to be paddled by undressed young ladies.
Who doesn't?
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
it's exactly. It's Alcon. That's called the English vice, or used to be. And so, yeah, it was a sex club with the side order of flagellation. And then after the Second World War, that whole thing had to because as after the Second World War, casual sex stopped being a social problem. A woman could do that and just say, I'm liberated, deal with it. So the sex clubs, many of the sex clubs had to completely redefine themselves as deep esoteric spiritual practices or go under.
Okay.
And so we have a number of organizations in the Western world that used to be sex clubs. And if you talk to some really old line Wicca types, I knew a guy many years ago who was involved in the very first generation of American Wicca, and he says there were Wiccan covens that advertised themselves in swingers newsletters back in the day. Okay,
That's interesting.
So,
the pineapple there.
My point to bringing up all this sordid stuff is that there are things that back in the day presented themselves as initiatory orders where it was a typical Victorian pretense. And no, you probably didn't get into those by joining the Masons. You got into those by knowing somebody and having an interest in cheap nookie.
Interesting. OTO was part of this?
It's an entire social underworld that most people don't know about today, and the few people that remember are usually desperately trying to keep their mouths shut. But at any rate, the point of this was simply that you mentioned the Church of Satan and the OTO as places where Masons might end up, and in my experience, not really.
I will tell you, I do know Masons who are in OTO.
After the OTO rebranded itself under Great Mercury, good Lord, yes. No, he completely reworked the system, turned the jumbled mess that Aleister Crowley left behind into a working system. I know entire lodges that are mostly OTO people, but
that's very interesting.
That's what it's become now. I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to get them in trouble with brand lodges. But no, there are lodges that still exist because they were on the edge of going under, and the local OTO people who were typically renting space from them said, Masonry is worth preserving. And so
that's very interesting.
So all of the men from the OTO lodge end up joining the craft, and some of them are very serious Masons.
Wow. So let me ask you this, because I asked Chuck and Mark Stavish to some extent as well. We had him on the show. Can you have a left-hand path? Let's put it this way. Can left-hand path lead you to enlightenment?
Okay, what do you mean? I'm going to do a Professor Jode on you. What do you mean by the left-hand path? That term has a lot of different meanings.
Okay. I might require some education on it. Admittedly, I don't know probably as much as I should. My understanding is the left-hand path is, as opposed to do what thou wilt, but cause no harm. It's do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, right? So it's basically, in other words, do whatever you want because it's all good, kind of thing. And whether that leads to hedonism or it leads to getting sucked up into your ego like Ziggy Stardust, or whoever, then it's a whole, it's to be differentiated from replacing your will with God's will, which might be the right hand path idea.
I have known people who went to that kind of left-hand path whole hog, and people who went that kind of right-hand path whole hog. And in my experience, neither of those paths leads any place particularly useful. There is a middle way, which has to do with
the Buddha's middle way.
What? Doesn't have
Buddha's
to be Buddhist.
Middle way. Oh,
no,
okay.
Just here's you have. I mean, we both have two hands. And it doesn't make a lot of good. There's not a lot of point in lopping one of them off. We are all in relationship to the divine, but the divine gave us, the great architect of the universe gave us willpower, and gave us desires and needs and wants, and that's an educational process. That doesn't mean that we're going to go my ego, my untrammeled will is going to stomp the crap out of the rest of the world, and I'm going to get everything I want just because I want it. That leads to stupidity very quickly. But it's equally dumb to go, no, I'm not actually going to want anything. I'm going to let the world just run over me like a freight truck. Both of one of the lessons that I think is meant to be taught but is not often learned by the grand metaphor of the two pillars with the entrance between them, okay, is the opposite of one bad idea is usually another bad idea. Okay, so the absolute wallowing in the individual will and the absolute renunciation of the individual will are both kind of dumb. It's like deciding that the only alternative to dying of thirst is drowning. Somewhere in between those two, there's a good relationship with water. In the same way, Aristotle was all over this back in the day. Aristotle used to wrote about how, if you want to, if courage, let's say, is the midpoint between two vices, not the opposite of one. Courage is distinct from cowardice, but it's also distinct from foolhardiness.
Sure.
Okay, and so on down the catalog of virtues. Every virtue is the midpoint between two vices. And so again, here are your two pillars. Here are your two fierce guardians of the path. If you walk into one of the pillars, I promise you're going to bonk your nose, and you're not going to get into the temple. If you walk straight between them, well, there's this thing called a door, and you go on.
Yes, or the Vesica Pisces, depending on what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. There's the Vesica. Okay, you don't go this circle, you don't go that circle. You go to the place where they overlap, and then it opens, and the way is open for you. And so,
and now we're back to sex cults. Right.
I wasn't going to go there. Sometimes a vesica is just a vesica.
We see where his mind went.
All good. All good.
I think it was Carl Jung who pointed out that sometimes the penis is just a phallic symbol.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. Absolutely. So with that, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of Western esotericism today?
Oh man. Let's see. Let's go down the list. I have a hard time thinking of anything in Western esotericism that isn't misunderstood. If I had to choose one thing, though, I would say, by most people, you go out there out of the narrow fringe circles of those of us who actually practice this stuff, and you're in Harry Potter land. And I think that's a good place to start. The notion that magic, let's use that dreadful word. It's not a 4-letter word; it has 5 letters, so we can use it in polite company. Okay, that magic is about waving a wand around it, babbling some words in ungrammatical fake Latin, and having some physically impossible thing happen. Okay, that's the that's the notion of magic. This sort of Harry Potterism, doing stuff that technology does, like making brooms fly or what have you. Okay, and if you, in fact, as a teacher of occultism, I constantly have when I get complete noobs, one of the main things I have to do is deal with the fact that they expect physically impossible things to happen, and it usually takes a while before they grasp that we're talking about, quote Dion Fortune here, causing changes in consciousness in accordance with will. It's not about yanking the that was her definition. Magic is the art and science of causing changes in consciousness in accordance with will. Yes, she was ripping off of Aleister Crowley's definition, which she thought was far too broad to be useful. But if you look at anything that you do within anything that your standard, you go down to the local hoodoo shop if you have one. I assume New Jersey's got to have some. Go down to the local workshop, the local place you get conjure supplies, the local botanica or what have you, and see what the spells are there to do. Okay, here's a love spell.
Right.
Now, we all know the main reason that people have trouble getting into good relationships has nothing to do with any physical incapacity. It's all, the gospel according to the Beatles. It's all in your mind. Usually it's a lack of self-confidence and a few habits that make you look like a dweeb. And if you can change the state of consciousness that causes you the loss of self-confidence and makes you act like a dweeb, then your chances of, finding somebody compatible go soaring up in the stratosphere, quote, like Magick, unquote. In the same way, people talk about, I want to cast a spell, I want to become rich. Okay, anybody can become rich. It's not that hard. All you have to do is make that your central goal and subordinate everything else to it. Most people don't become rich because they want to make money, but they mostly want to spend money. So any money they make, they spend, so they don't get rich. If you really decide you want to you want to gather money, you stop spending anything you don't have to, and you take every dollar and you say, how can I use that dollar to get more? Your eyes are wide open for opportunities to make money, and you're out there working, you're out there hustling, you're out there doing whatever you have to do. You make money. You do that within within not that many years. If that's your will, if that's where your will is focused and centered, you can make $1 million. Anybody can. But you have to have that singleness of will, and that takes the capacity to cause change in consciousness. Lots of people are in economic trouble because they just simply don't see the economic activities that surround them. That's one of the real curses of poverty. If you've been beaten down by being poor, especially in childhood, you don't think there are opportunities. There are. You're unable to see them. Magick can help that. That's why you go to that botanica we were talking about, or the workshop around the corner, and they have a lot of things to do that will help you with your finances. They'll sell you a bottle of money stay with me oil that you use to do this and that and the other. And it changes your consciousness. You stop going, I'll just spend the money, and go, no, I'm going to pocket that. I'm going to put it in, I'm going to stash that. And pretty soon your finances transform.
But is it the oil? Is it the oil that does it?
Well, no, that's a complicated question, now, isn't it? The thing that I would say is that human beings, a lot of people like to think of themselves as rational beings, but human beings are not rational beings. No. We have an incredibly thin veneer of rationality over an ordinary, standard issue, USDA choice, baboon brain. Standard social primate, okay? If you want to work with that social primate brain, you have to use non-rational means. And that means symbols, it means rituals, it means smells, it means the whole panoply of sensory gimmickry that an occultist uses. And so, that smell, that oil is scented. That oil contains herbal compounds. It stimulates the brain in certain odd ways. But you also have the set and setting. You also have, this is this bottle that says money, stay with me oil. And you're putting a 5-spot on this bill and wrapping it up and putting it in your pocket in a particular way. And that's part of the process of changing your consciousness so that all of a sudden money stops being something you spend and starts being something you stash.
Interesting.
Yeah. And yes, does magic work? Why, yes, Socrates, it works. And
I've always preferred Diogenes to Socrates, but yes.
That's fine. That's fine. I just the reason I use that quote is simply that in Plato's dialogues, once Socrates gets on a tear, everyone else is reduced to saying, why, yes, Socrates, and things like that.
Do you, but speaking of, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No, I just wanted to follow up to your question, Alex. So, John, in your view, then, what is the purpose of esoteric study in today's world? Especially people are more materialistic, it seems like...
to some extent, that's like saying, what is the purpose of a screwdriver? Well, you can use it for a lot of different things.
Sure.
I see esotericism as a toolkit, and it's a toolkit that can be applied to many different human needs. In the highest sense, the purpose of esoteric study is to help us integrate ourselves with the divine, to achieve, if I can use the Martinist term for the reintegration. But that's kind of the long goal, and it takes most of us. That's not necessarily something we start out doing. The first thing to do is fix your life. If your life is not working, you need to fix it. Gain the confidence that you can fix it, and also get the experience of knowing, so I was actually responsible for all these ways in which my life sucked. And then that leads to other things, and that leads to other things. There are many different steps. and many different tools, and you may be using a lot of ritual magic early on and be doing more meditation later on or what have you. But it is much more of a toolkit. It is much more a esotericism. If I had to come up with a general formula, I'd say esotericism is a way to make the process of human incarnation more effective as a learning experience.
Oh, interesting.
Because as I see it, this is something that I think most esoteric traditions share, but it's something that's very specific within my Druid tradition. The point of our being incarnate, the point of our being here in this world, is a learning experience, and by that I don't mean intellectual learning. We are here to be refined. We are here to be forged like a lump of metal into something useful. We are here to learn and grow and change and develop the capacities the divine has placed in us. And all of the successes and failures, joys and pains, all the experiences of life are part of that process of, the hammer blows of the divine smith who is pounding us into shape. And so esotericism is a way where we can, is probably one of the most useful ways that we can cooperate with that process and move with the hammer blows so they hurt a little less, and and flow ourselves into the shape as we become aware, as we understand what it is, and so on. And so it's the less clumsy, less slow, less awkward way of going through material incarnation. And it's in terms of the Druid tradition, which treats reincarnation as a reality. It's something that most people come to after they've been around quite a few times and are getting ready to start actively taking a role and moving onwards.
God, I mean, you holy crap! I mean, like one paragraph, and you've got 5 days of stuff to unpack in there.
Well, trust me, I know. In the training process, you'd take something like that for a week's meditation. Every morning you're taking one phrase of it and saying, okay, enter into meditative state, unpack it. What does this mean? Da 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 da. So yes, I know.
So, and I'm sure people are sick of hearing this by now, but I went on a 10-day Vipassana meditation in February, where you get to play monk for 10 days. It was a lot of. It was very interesting. I wouldn't exactly say it was fun, but it was very fulfilling, and I would definitely do it again.
Okay. I'm glad to hear it.
But so I guess my question is, and I was hoping that with it, I would get some level of, getting closer to Kensho. Are you familiar with Kensho as a concept?
Oh yeah. Back in the day, growing up with the Japanese step family, I had a fair amount of exposure to Japanese Buddhism, more Shingon, which was the family tradition, than Zen, but I did learn a fair amount about Zen.
Okay, so, but Kensho, for those that don't know, is basically where your brain, in essence, not your brain, but your chattering mind turns off, at least for a while.
You get that first solid glimpse of what's beyond words.
Correct. So I've had glimpses of it. Dave's had glimpses of it, especially when doing psychedelics. That's like a cheat sheet, cheater's way to get there to some extent. I'm not actually sure that that's where you're getting, though. It's something like it, maybe, but I don't think it's the same thing. But regardless, have you had Kensho? Have you gone through that?
I have certain. Okay, I'm going to step back a little bit because the Buddhist way of conceiving of this process is a little idiosyncratic to Buddhism, and it's also specific to the Western or to the Eastern approach. The idea in the systems of Western meditation that I've studied for, at this point, most of my life, is that instead of trying to simply clobber the mind into silence, the idea is to make the mind transparent to what's beyond it. And so we use the mind. We work with the thinking mind until it starts becoming transparent. And then, moments will come where it just goes silent. And there's just this moment of perfect clarity and something becomes clear. And yes, I've had that experience.
That's wonderful.
And it is. It can be wonderful. It can be rather harrowing. depending on exactly what you perceive, because the spiritual world is not cotton candy and fluffy clouds and unicorns gagging on rainbows. It is much vaster and much more rich and complex than the material world.
So Joseph Campbell talks a lot about myth, and Mircea Eliade, who was my paisan, if you want to call him that. He was a Romanian that was always credited as French. It spoke about comparative religions rather than comparative mythology. And you talk about myth and storytelling as it being basically part of the initiatory experience. So does it serve as a sort of a passageway or a keyhole to get to that spiritual, that really true spiritual knowledge?
I would say it's more it's the stairway. Now, in talking about narrative, first of all, we're talking about our species' oldest and most thoroughly developed information storage method. Back before the invention of writing, all of the important information was stored by compressing it into lively, colorful narrative stories, the things we call myths, the Greek mythos, narrative, the narratives that matter, and teaching it to children. If you've had children, you know that they want to hear that same story at bedtime every night until you're going mad with boredom. That's hardwired into our species. And I promise you, if I ask you to start singing the alphabet rhyme, okay, anybody who grew up certainly in the English-speaking world, the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we even do it in the same sing-song tones we learned all the way back when we were like 3 or 4, okay? We, human beings, are hardwired to absorb things like that in infancy and early childhood, and to keep them intact all the way into advanced old age. So that's the upload process for myth. So if you grow up hearing these stories over and over again, you've got them for life. And then typically in traditional societies, when you are mature, then if you're interested, you approach an elder, and the elder will say, okay, let's, you'll go through certain tests, and then you'll go through certain rituals, and then they'll start explaining what the myths actually mean. You'll learn how to unpack them. Okay. And so, for example, we still have a survival of that in Masonry. The story of Hiram Abiff is a classic narrative myth. What does it mean? I don't think a lot of Masons have ever thought about that. And yet it has layers and layers of meaning. And there are some Masonic authors who try to unpack what's going on in there, that it's obviously not history. It's not in the Bible. But what does it mean? What does it symbolize? What can it teach us? But this, through the ritual process, through the telling of the story, we have this story that's been passed down practically unchanged since the Middle Ages. And so that's, there you see myth functioning in its usual role as the preparatory process, as the stairway that brings you to the door of the mysteries.
It's also, we say that, right? But wasn't it? Didn't we move from the Noahite version to the Solomonic version,
to the Hiramic version? Well, basically, back in the day, you had stonemasons guilds that had two different. There were two different versions of it. There was the Noahide version, and there was the one that ended up at the Tower of Babel. And there was, there were various, I think pretty much all of the old craft guilds had such narratives. We have fragments of a few of them left.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, did you ever read The Name of the Wind? It's a book. It's a work of fiction.
Let's see. Is that fantasy novel by the guy who never wrote Volume 3?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, yes. That's the guy. No, I am as a writer, I have no patience with a writer who won't finish his series. And so
I don't think he knows how to do it. I think he painted himself into too much of a corner.
Anybody, it doesn't matter. You can always jump out of the corner. That's the great thing about being a writer. You can invent something.
Patrick Rothfuss is the guy's name. But
I haven't read Rothfuss. I have not read the whole George R.R. Martin epic.
Oh, that's good stuff.
That whole thing. I insist. I want there to be an ending before I start. And
okay.
I actually do that in my novels. When I was working on this, I have this 7-volume series, The Weird of Hali. Mm-hmm. And which is kind of H.P. Lovecraft stood on its head, the tentacle horrors of the good guys. And I actually wrote the client. I was just getting into book 2, and I said, okay, this is going to be an extended series. And I went and I wrote the climactic scene. I wrote the chapter where in book 7, where everything finally comes to a climax and great Cthulhu rises from the sea. So there was no question but that sooner, when I got there, that would be ready. I knew what I was working toward, and my readers were not going to be. I feel I have a responsibility to my readers. Somebody's going to do me the favor of buying my book, helping me to pay my rent, and getting into this fictional construct that I've created for them, getting into it and enjoying it, and handing over a couple of hours of their life, which they'll never see again. I can at least do them the courtesy of providing an ending. And hopefully a satisfying ending. Certainly was satisfying to me, and my readers seem to like it. But I have no patience with the kind of prima donna who's going, no, I can't be bothered to finish my story.
So let me ask you this: Tamerlane the Great, who is a character, not so much. He's only alluded to. He's never actually discussed in terms of anything more than being a figure of ancient myth. So Tamerlane the Great gets. This is within the rubric of this guy's universe. So not to be confused with any person living
with the actual Tamerlane the Great, who was Timuri Lenk, the
Turkish, or Temujin, or yes, exactly. Now, not the Mongol ruler. So this guy was he's almost like an Elminster, like a huge or a Gandalf, a huge powerful wizard. It kind of you get it because he's named the Great, obviously, not the just kind of pretty good. So he gets imprisoned in a room, a la the Cask of Amontillado, where he's bricked up, and he's imprisoned in a room where there are no doors or no windows. It's just a stone room. But Tamerlane the Great knows the secret name of stone. And when he pronounces it, he is immediately, stone obeys him and opens up, and he's able to get out. And then he starts to fall because he's at the top of a tower. But he's Tamerlane the Great, and of course knows the secret name of the wind. And when he pronounces the secret name of the wind obeys him and slowly brings him to the ground. Another iteration of this, I'm not sure why this fascinates me, but it does, is if you ever read any Warhammer 40K novels, and that's in the Warhammer universe, again, fiction, but there are some Inquisitor series, and they fight against these bad guys that are trying to figure out the word, the ancient lost language of Enuncia, which is basically this sort of words that you speak, words of power. And once you speak them, they literally hurt you to say them. So it takes a toll on your body somehow to actually expel these words out of you. Rothfuss says the same thing.
Unquote. Yeah.
In essence, yeah. And much can be said about that, whether you're talking about the idea of the language of the angels or the language we spoke before the Tower of Babel. Potentially something like that. So any thoughts on that in terms of words of power or other things like that?
First of all, one of the other, you don't see this quite as often now as you did back in the day, but there's a lot of people for whom it's not Harry, or there used to be a lot of people for whom it's not Harry Potter that is the sort of magnetic mountain that draws would-be magicians to their ruin. It's Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, yes.
The number of people back in the day who I knew who were desperately looking for a spell, the basic fireball spell. Okay. Now,
it can't be that hard. It's only level 1. Come on, John.
That's exactly. Again, that's technology. If you want a wand of fireballs, go get a California candle. That's what it does, right? Okay. or a flare gun. That's all it is.
Right.
So, language is a complicated thing. And one of the things, this is one of those places where dealing with the baboon mind, you need to make adjustments. For example, if you are doing spells in a language you don't know, they're generally more effective. And in my experience, this works no matter what the language is. I did one of my projects back between the two world wars. There were a variety of groups in Britain, as far as I was where they all were, that combined the Golden Dawn with material from the Druid tradition. And they didn't survive when everyone went gaga over Wicca after the Second World War. They just kind of they lost, didn't get any new members, and they just died out. But I reverse engineered a comparable system, and I found using Welsh as the magical language, it works just as well. If you don't happen to know Welsh, I mean, if that's the language you grew up with, you probably want to find something else. But because when we take a language we don't know, and we use it as the basis for magic, we can actually focus on the sounds. We don't have the chattering mind getting in the way. Okay? And so when you're doing the whole Enochian business, first of all, it sounds exactly like something that Elric and Melimine or someone would belt out into the air, or Tamerlane the Great or whoever we have. But sure, you can just get into the sounds because it has the mind doesn't immediately parse it into rise, therefore, and appear. And so that's why, for example...
What are you summoning onto the podcast, John?
I'm not doing so. I only did those words, so I didn't specify what exactly I was doing. But this is why, I mean, in Jewish tradition, for example, for many, many, many years, you didn't use Hebrew in ordinary language. In European Jewish circles, you use Yiddish. Come on, not the Ashkenazi, the Sephardic circles, you use Ladino. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're different languages. Hebrew was there for ritual, and so you could just get into the sounds. And it worked that way. Sanskrit plays a very similar role in India these days. Nobody speaks Sanskrit in daily life. It's a sacred language. Because it's a sacred language, it can have that sonic resonance that an ordinary everyday language does not have. You could do it with just about anything. I'm quite convinced that if you didn't know Pig Latin, if you never encountered Pig Latin in childhood, you could probably end up using Pig Latin as a magical language and get good results.
That is very interesting. I guess that's why the church, I mean, I'm Orthodox Christian by tradition, and especially the Russian church uses Old Slavonian, which is
Old Slavonic, yes.
Yes, so I guess they invented that for ritual purpose, in essence.
Yeah, they knew exactly what they were doing. People in earlier times were less stupid about such things than we are.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, the sonic effect of language is like that, and there are nuances like the Enochian thing that I quoted there. Weirdly, there are very few languages where that doesn't seem to work. I have seen probably a dozen different groups of people who set out to do some kind of magical or pagan thing using Tolkien's Elvish. And now, of course, he knew languages inside and out to an extent that almost nobody else in the 20th century did. I think he booby-trapped the language to keep it from being used for ritual.
Oh, that's a smart move. But I guess my main point is there a true essence of things? It like that speaks to, it's like, let's say if you know the true name of a demon, you can control him, or an angel, or whatever it is. So that speaks to the idea that there's an essence, a veritable essence behind all of the glamour, let's call it, right?
Yeah, and that's it. Give me just a moment. I need to turn a light on. It's getting dark here.
All righty.
There we go. Now I can see myself think. Okay, this is, you get this tradition, but if you actually look at how things work out in practice, I have my doubts. For example, in In Japan, in Japanese Buddhism, they have a received way of translating, of speaking Sanskrit, which sounds nothing like Sanskrit. Okay? So, for example, when we think of the holy syllable as Om, in Japan it's pronounced Ung. Actually works really nicely, and you get to the gate gate paragate parastam gate bodhiswaha, the great spell from the Heart Sutra is gyate gyate hara so gate bochi sowaka. And yet it works. Yet,
so it's the intent,
there are Japanese Buddhists who achieve enlightenment through the practice of this amazingly garbled Sanskrit spell. So, is there an essence? Doubtless. Can it be turned into a sound that human mouth can make? I don't think so. And nor does that seem to be required of us.
What is required of us?
That's a good question. If I knew a complete list, I would do it and then transcend this plane in a flash of lightning.
Yeah, you're about sick of it as I am, aren't you?
Well, if my inner experiences have anything to go by, I've been here for a while, and I'm very interested in going on and doing something much more interesting.
You're done with slumming it.
Yeah.
You do what you have to do, but it's the material world is kind of a mess, and I think I've learned most of what it has to teach, and I could handle doing something else for a while. Now watch, I'll get finished with this life, and it will be a matter of, okay, yes, you're promoted to the next level up, but you get to help guide and take care of this bunch of occultists down here in post-imperial America. Have fun.
Yeah, exactly. You get to function as bodhisattva for some numbskulls.
Spirit guide, I don't expect to be bodhisattva anytime this million years.
Well, let's see what happens. Never say never.
Yeah, you work your way up. I back in the day, I studied a lot of things derived from theosophy. And one of the great things about theosophy is that it's designed to keep you from getting arrogant by saying, oh, you have to go through, before you actually achieve, this the state of like becoming one of the lesser masters, you have all of these lives to do. And, the current swarm of souls incarnated human being has to do 4 more rounds through this entire loop of planets. And Manvantara is stretching out into the vast distance. And I think Blavatsky did that on purpose to keep people from getting into this, I'm about to become a lesser master. Well, no.
I don't buy that. I'll be honest with you. I think she did it because she didn't know what was next, and she just filled it up with a bunch of bullshit.
I think, she was not averse to spinning a yarn.
No,
that
certainly
but,
not.
No, I think it was quite deliberate, because one of the problems that the occult community has always had is people who have some minor little realization and convince themselves that they are the Messiah. There's no shortage of those, and there were no shortage of them in Blavatsky's time. And I think she was trying to come up with a way to say, you're not the Messiah. And of course, I think she may have also had some sense of what Annie Besant was going to do after her time with the whole Krishnamurti fiasco, which ended up nearly destroying the Theosophical Society.
Well, it served them right. I mean, they were trying to use the guy, and the guy's like, I have nothing to teach you. Go on your way.
Yeah, exactly. No. Jiddu Krishnamurti, I have immense admiration for Jiddu Krishnamurti. But the fact that Besant and Leadbeater were dumb enough to get themselves whipped up into this frenzy, because I think they actually believed it. I thought it was the Rorishes
that were behind all that.
They had something to do with it, but it was actually mostly Annie Besant.
Mm-hmm.
It was her and then the network, the bunch of people around her in Mumbai at that time, or outside of Mumbai, where the Theosophical headquarters. They had their own little cult there, basically, and they had convinced themselves that the young kid of one of the groundskeepers, I think Krishnamurti's dad was going to be the next world teacher, and it just kind of went toxic from there.
Wow, that's interesting.
And then, yeah, in 1929, he said, "No, I have nothing to teach you. I dissolve this organization established to grovel at my feet. Truth is a pathless land. Deal with it, sucker." And turned around and walked away. The whole thing crashed to the ground, and the stock market crashed to the ground a couple of months later and took the financial basis for the organization away with it. And we entered into a new age of occultism.
That is very interesting. So what is... Dave, you have any questions before I run down more rabbit holes here?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to ask, in talking about obviously all this deep esoteric teachings and such, what are the first inner steps somebody should take toward the real self-awakening? Because obviously you mentioned if your life's completely jacked up, it's your fault.
Right.
Yeah, but it's going to be very difficult for you to deal with that all at once. What I recommend for anybody who's just starting out is to start with some basic practices. The set that I want students to work up to is a daily meditation, a daily protective ritual, and a daily divination. The protective ritual can be the lesser ritual, the pentagram. It can be the sphere of protection. It can be anything of that sort, just to kind of get the process of working through ritual, of moving energy in ritual, and begin the process of cleansing your subtle bodies. Okay? The meditation, I specifically recommend what's called discursive meditation, the Western form of meditation that works with symbols and thoughts and trains the mind rather than just trying to shut it off. Divination, pick your oracle. I originally learned this from people who mostly use the tarot, but there are many, many oracles you can use. I've had people do all kinds of stuff. These days, my divination is check daily transit across my natal chart in astrology. But you do these three things because the divination teaches you to pay attention to your intuition. Meditation begins the process of training your mind and getting past the monkey chatter. Ritual, again, it teaches you how to work actively with symbols and how to work with visualization and how to begin to cleanse yourself. You just maintain those basic practices. Once you get to the point of doing it, very often a beginner, you just give them one simple practice, like what was the one George Winslow Plummer used to say, stand at the window first thing each morning and breathe deeply for X number of breaths and repeat this affirmation. And just doing something that simple, because it forces you out of your habits, out of your ordinary sort of drifting around, that will sometimes catalyze remarkable changes. And so, but you get the habit of you have to establish the habit of practice. You have to maintain it in the face of boredom, and you will get bored. Especially once you take up meditation, which is the most boring activity any human being has ever invented.
I can't stay awake. How do I can't do it, man.
No. If you can't stay awake, I'll tell you what I did, because I was having that problem, and I would meditate stark naked on a metal chair in winter. I stay awake.
That'll keep you awake.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's the thing. You figure out, how do you make
John? I can't unsee that now, right?
Yeah. Well, that's just one of those things. But no, the thing is, it works, and you figure out, how do you make yourself just that little bit too uncomfortable to doze off, and you maintain that. And pretty soon what happens is your subconscious mind, which is trying to distract you from this, goes, oh, all right. And it stomps away on a hop and kind of turns its back on you and ignores you while you meditate. And then eventually it starts realizing that it can have some fun cooperating. And then it starts really getting interesting. But you have to get past that period where it is throwing hissy fits in your direction. But anyway, you establish just this basic rhythm of practice, and that, even if it's just the simple, that simple thing of standing at the window every morning, and that starts that process of breaking through the habitual drifting that we all have.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beginning. Once you actually do something just because you've decided to do it, just because it's a spiritual, that's you're contributing that to your spiritual life, that starts the opening of the door. And everything else follows from that. It also trains the will, by the way, because it's, getting up, you're blurry, you stumble out of bed, you're about to go off, get some, no, I've got to go to the window, open it a crack, stand there doing, God, this is so boring. Why am I doing this? You just keep doing it. You're training your will. And, at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's cold, you want your coffee or what have you. It's very effective will training. You do the 7 breaths, you go get your coffee, you're fine, okay? But it builds strength. It builds focus. It builds the capacity to actually act rather than just to react. So
that's very good. Which one of your books has this sort of a catechism to develop?
Well, several of them actually. In terms of basic practices, let's see. Learning Ritual Magic, which I wrote with my late wife and one of my other practitioners many years ago. Learning Ritual Magic is the intro book for the Golden Dawn tradition. It was actually the introductory course we used for a magic lodge we ran for a while. The Druidry Handbook does the same thing. Actually, there are 2 books now for Druidry. The Druidry Handbook is one, another one's called the Druid Path. Are both they're different but comparable introductions to the sort of basic practices of Druidry. More recently, I have a book called The Way of the Golden Section, which is part of what's going to eventually be an 11 book and 1 card deck series that teaches a specific way of old-fashioned occult training. And that's very much another of, okay, here are the basics. Here is how you do it step by step, starting from, I know nothing and going from there.
That is pretty awesome.
I remember painfully well what it was like at the age of 15. Getting my first battered paperback copy of W.E. Butler's The Magician, His Training and Work, which had enough, just barely enough to get started. But it was not set up in that kind of step-by-step manner, and just wishing, why didn't somebody have a simple practical guide that you can do step-by-step? So I ended up writing some.
Do you know Dennis Poisson by any means? He runs that YouTube page called Foolish Fish.
No, I'm not familiar with him.
Oh, he's got some.
Somebody mentioned him today.
Today? Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
look at the synchronicity here. So, that's pretty awesome.
Somebody. I think it was somebody on my journal, on my Dream With journal mentioned Foolish Fish. But it might have been there, might have been Reddit. I'm not sure, one or the other. But yeah, no, I'm not familiar with him at all.
Okay, very interesting. He does. He doesn't rep these guys, but there's a series of books called the Academy of Magic or something like that, or the Gallery of Magic that espouse to put out some interesting stuff on there. He mentioned to me that he felt like, I said, "Can you get rich doing magic?" And he goes, "Well, not really, because it takes a toll on you." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I got a house, but I had a heart attack." So, I don't know if that's just his thought on it, or if there's some equivalent exchange there on.
It depends very much on how you're trying to do things. Because, well, first of all, if you want to get rich, you need to focus your intention on getting rich, not on practicing magic. Okay?
Right.
If being rich is your goal in life, or is the goal that you want to do before you do anything else, go do that thing. Become a stockbroker or something. Focus your attention on making money. Give it your all. Set everything else aside, and you'll get rich. Okay. The problem is people want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be full-time mages and then get money just kind of handed to them, and that's usually going to blow up one way or another. If you're good enough, yes, you can get the house, but you may have a heart attack. The other way to do it, and the way that I find more useful, let me take a step back here. There are several ways within an esoteric standpoint to have things happen in the world, okay? You can do the magical approach of, commanding and making things happen and, wand of fireballs, plus 4 back scratcher or what, what have you. You can just throw yourself into that and make the world behave. You can make it work. You can do some remarkable things that way. I've had some back when I was doing that, mostly by way of the Golden Dawn tradition. I had some really remarkable results. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot of work, and it usually does come with a cost. On the other hand, you can take a practice that's focused on meditation and divination. You can develop intuition and the inner clarity that allows you simply to figure out where the tides of events are flowing and simply go over to the right place and let the apple drop into your hand.
Yeah, that sounds way better. How do we do that?
Okay, and that's where you want a practice that focuses on meditation rather than ritual, that focuses on wisdom rather than power. In fact, there's a distinction that sometimes gets made. Dion Fortune was into this, the idea that, there's magic and there's mysticism. And these are your two choices, and their magic is the way of power, and mysticism is the way of love. Well, they're forgetting one. What about wisdom? I would argue there is an occult path that is distinct from the magical path and distinct from the mystical path, that it works through the cultivation of wisdom and intuition, and has that almost Taoist quality of, okay, and if I walk right over here and put out my hand, yes, I know the apple's going to drop there. Clunk, there it is. There it is, munch. And that's increasingly the way my own work has been focusing. And I mean, I'm not rich, but I have more money than I need. Actually, I make more money than I spend these days, which is, I suppose, as good a definition of rich as anyone could have. And it hasn't involved any particular sacrifices. I mean, other than hard work, but I like writing, so that's not anything particularly traumatic. But I think there are ways to do magic is overemphasized in the occult curriculum these days. Magic is the idea of doing magic, making things happen, and commanding this, and doing the whole a kind of magical machismo of you're sort of thrusting your will out. We're getting into kind of Crowleyan metaphors here. Plunging your will outward into the waiting void of the cosmos. That is to say, you become a dick.
The personification of a dick. Yes, very
exactly. And so and this is not necessarily a good way to do things. You can have a more relaxed approach to life. There are times when that's appropriate, but the genitalia are 3% of the human body, and the other 97% also have a purpose.
You're espousing like a Big Lebowski sort of way of going about magic.
Kind of.
So the dude's
version. The dude abides.
Kind of
yeah, the dude abides, man. Abides. Exactly. You abide.
That's great.
Just slap it on the table.
So yeah, right. you
just have a white Russian and calm down. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. But you need to learn how to abide in the right way.
Yes, that is true.
But yeah, now when I mentioned Taoism, that's not by accident. The Tao Te Ching was one of the major influences on my thinking from my teen years on. I got a copy of it back in the mid 1970s. I still have that copy, and the pages are yellowing, and it's looking fairly battered now because I've read it many, many, many times.
Now, let me ask you, Dave and I are Christian of various sorts and such, among other things, I think, as well at this point. But how do you do Christianity correctly?
Well, first of all, I'm not the person you ask about that. Christ is the person you ask about that, okay? So there's that. Second of all,
well, the beard fooled me, so yes, absolutely.
There was a while in my early 30s when I could fake a Jesus really impressively. I'm a little tubby now to really make that. I'm also a little old, but
yes, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. But I would note that if we grant the basic theology, the basic sort of theological construction of Christianity, where the motive power of the cosmos is God's love, okay? And that love is directed to every single soul. That love is not going to be identical for any two souls. We're talking an infinite deity here, okay? So the love that the love that draws you to God and draws God to you is not the same as the love that draws me to God and draws God to me. And, so on for every other soul in the entire infinite expanse of the cosmos. What this means is there is no one right way to be Christian. What this means is that the right way needs to be learned through your own experience of interacting with the divine. Did that cause all of you to fall dead silent? It apparently did. No, I have to say here, this is coming from within, my own spiritual and theological take on things. Among the other things that happened in the course of a long and rather confusing life is that I was consecrated as a bishop in an outfit called the Universal Gnostic Church, which was...
Wait, is that the Johannite Church, or is that something else?
No. This is something very different.
Okay.
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there were 3 ministers in the Universalist Church in Pennsylvania. The Universalist Church doesn't exist anymore. It was gobbled up by the Unitarians. There was a merger in, I think, 1961, 1962, around there. And in the 1950s, when this was being talked about, there were people in the Universalist Church who were saying, no, do not do this merger. The Unitarians are just trying to gobble our congregations. They're going to erase our existence and our traditions. And of course, that's what happened. The U's are basically just Unitarian these days. They don't have any trace of the old Universalist movement. And so there were these 3 Universalist ministers in Pennsylvania who decided they were not going to put up with it. They were not going to go along with this merger. They schismed, and they found a renegade bishop of the Liberal Catholic Church, the outfit that's associated with the Theosophical Society, to consecrate them to the historic episcopacy. So that happened. 2 of them stayed in Pennsylvania, and I have no idea what happened to them. I don't know if anyone does. But one of them, a guy named Matthew Shaw, a religious name Rodon Staros, which is slightly garbled Greek for Rose Cross, went to Colorado, where he met a rather interesting woman named Dr. Julia Ashley, who was she grew up wealthy, married a rich husband. He fell in love with a chorus girl. Divorce happened. She was set for life, and proceeded to spend her most of her life doing things like studying with Edgar Cayce and studying with Manly Palmer Hall and going to Zurich to hang out with students of Carl Jung and visiting Arthur Edward Waite.
Now that's a pretty cool life.
Oh yeah, no,
that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was an amazing journey. And so she if you look her up, she was one of the subscribers for the original edition of the Secret Teachings of All Ages. Manly P. Hall's vast tome that came out in the original glorious edition. She paid for one of those.
Oh wow!
But yeah, so and those 2, I don't know if they actually became an item, but they certainly worked together quite a bit. And but he had his Universalist Gnostic thing that he'd worked up, and she was an initiate. She was at the head of several small esoteric orders at that time. They were both teachers of my main teacher, John Gilbert, and so that was how in 2004 I was consecrated into the historic episcopacy in this little oddball Universal Gnostic Church, which was Universalist in theology. That's to say, it's based on the idea that an actually loving God would not condemn any soul to eternal damnation. Doubtless you get to deal with the consequences of your actions, quote, to the uttermost farthing, unquote, as Jesus put it. But that's not the same thing as, you didn't do what I told you, I'm going to beat you up forever. So it has that approach. We could get into that. At that point, we're not talking rabbit holes. We're talking, I don't know, elephant holes, brontosaur holes. They go down and they cover a great deal of distance.
They sure do.
But yeah, so that's one of the traditions that I inherited, and that connects into, by way of some of the other things that happened with my teacher John Gilbert and with several other people, that connects into the Gnostic teachings of Richard Duc de Palatine, the one of the major figures in 20th century Gnosticism, and so on and so forth. And so all of that is always going to show up when I start talking about religion, because I embraced these teachings because they made sense to me. And so, yes, I know I'm that bizarre item, a Gnostic Hermetic Druid.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean,
yeah, but
is John Gilbert still alive?
Oh no, he passed away. He passed away in 2021.
I'm sorry.
He was quite old. He was quite an old man at that time, and yeah, he ended up more or less shutting down his various esoteric traditions because there were very few people interested in them. He moved to Wyoming to be close to his kids, and then got old and died. Well, he was already very old, but he finished getting old and dying. And
it's amazing how people walk away from this stuff. It's very odd.
Well, in his case, I understand it, because he had a handful of people who were really devoted students of his. And then, they would study with him. They would learn everything he had to teach. They would start doing their own things. And there weren't that many more. And so by the time he was old, he was very tired. And he wasn't especially good with money. And several of the organizations that he'd been instrumental in founding had either folded or had been taken away from him by various political slimeries. And there were some ugly things with the terror organization he founded and so on. He was very disappointed with that. And so he decided it was time to just kind of settle down and pursue his own spiritual practice and wind things up during his last couple of years and spend time with his family. I certainly don't think he was wrong to do that. But I'm just bemoaning the fact that
a lot of stuff happens in martial arts the same way.
Oh, yeah.
I have a friend of mine, Alan Levin, who's a psychologist, and he came up through a path of Agni Yoga. If you're familiar with that as an idea, there were a Society of Agni Yoga out in California, and they did these things where they would couple massage and dance and all kinds of other things with meditation. And their meditation was you basically focus on 6 inches above your head to that particular chakra, and you would use it. You would have a crystal that you would imagine there, and that crystal would function 2 ways. One of which was a cleansing, the other one was a healing. So what you would do, you'd flip that crystal towards let's call it counterclockwise, and it would develop into a ball of fire, and then you would use that fire to come stream through your body and cleanse whatever was that needed cleansing in the body, and then you'd flip it the
other way for healing.
Right, correct. And it would turn into like a white light, basically a crystal white lighted.
Nice.
Yeah, so very interesting stuff.
Does anyone still teach this?
He does, but outside of that, and he was friends with Ralph Metzger too. Metzner, I should say, who's one of the 3 guys at the Harvard 3, from him and Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, or Richard Alpert. And so, yeah, he's, Alan's old enough to where he's in his 80s, so he's old enough to have actually, seen some of those giants walk among us, which is kind of cool from lots of points of view. So, but the thing is, I mean, what has ended up happening with John's material is that I was basically left as the last man standing.
And so that was fine, because I proceeded to have a series of conversations with his widow, and I have been proceeding to teach and pass on this material and to get it into as many hands as possible.
So that was going to be my next question for you is, I know you're right, but what do you teach? What do you actually propound out there?
First of all, I don't do a lot of in-person teaching. I'm not really good at it. I am mildly autistic, so I'm not necessarily that good in well, a lot of people apparently, but yeah, adult residual Asperger's syndrome is one of those things, and but I don't usually do a lot of in-person teaching, a lot of what I do is write books that are designed to pass on things that I've learned, things that I've developed, and people will pick those up. And there's that step-by-step series of practices, and they finish and go, "Wow, this works." Okay, and in a significant number of cases, that's ended up spinning off into an organization. I mentioned the work that I did on the sort of Druid Golden Dawn thing. There is now an organization, the Druidic Order of the Golden Dawn, that was founded by readers of my book, The Celtic Golden Dawn, and it's a going thing. And the people who are doing it they're serious. They are hardworking, and they're doing some really interesting, original magical work in this tradition that I created. And so I'm hoping to get the same thing to happen with on the one hand, the Golden Section Fellowship material I was talking about earlier. On the other hand, with some of John's material that can be passed on the same way. There are things that do have to be passed on in person. Obviously, I can't transmit the historic episcopacy by anything but proper laying on of hands, and I made some arrangements to do that. And there is a system of energy healing and Essene, supposedly Essene healing system, which also has to be passed on by personal contact. And I've been passing.
Now that would be very cool. Are you planning to teach that particularly? Or?
Yeah. No, that I've done. I've done classes on that, and that takes about 3 classes at a couple of months intervals, one for the apprentice work, one for the healer work, one for the master work, and then some further work before you become qualified as a teacher. It's been called Gnosticism.
Well, sign me up, dude. I want to do this.
Okay. Well, you probably have to arrange for some kind of context where I can come down and teach it.
Yeah. All right. That sounds cool.
And, I basically because my late wife was really good. She back before her health failed. She was an office manager. She was a bookkeeper. She handled all of things like that for me. That's not my talent. That kind of organizational work is not something I'm any good at. So my basic rule is if someone wants that to happen, they get to do the gut work. They get to to do the organizational stuff, and I'm perfectly willing to catch a train.
No doubt, and we could talk offline about that, because I think that would be I think there'd be a fair amount of people that would be very interested in something like that.
Okay, I that would not surprise me, but that's I'm and my basic rule is that as long as I don't end up out of pocket, I'm fine.
No, I'm sure there'd be a way to. Yeah, of course.
No, I'm not doing it to make money. It's just to make,
right.
Yeah.
No, but it shouldn't cost you money either. So yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
That's my rule. I make more than I need, but part of the reason I make more than I need is that my ancestors are Scottish. So anytime it comes to spending money, I have 100 generations of Scotsmen going, "Ah, laddie, you don't need to spend that."
I don't know if I ever told you, but I do the address to the haggis, and I did it about 5 times this past January.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of fun.
Nice. Do you like haggis?
I love haggis. I actually really do.
I'm delighted to hear that. I once had a whose ancestor ate the grossest food competition with a friend of mine who was Norwegian, and I don't know
he wins.
If he
There's no doubt he wins.
No, actually, well, he didn't like haggis, and I have no problem with lutefisk.
Well, lutefisk is not what's disgusting. Have you had surströmming?
No, I have not. I probably would enjoy it. What is it?
So, it's herring that they put with oil, and they basically seal it in a coffee can, and they allow it to. But there's enough air in there, so they're
you allow it to ferment.
So it starts to ferment, and then it starts to actually dilate the can into a football shape. So by the time they leave it on the shelf there for months, and by the time Christmas rolls around, when they open this thing up, I mean, durian melons have nothing on this thing. So you
but it's
smell it down the block. Well, it's sublime, but you have to get through that smell first. I mean, it's absolutely, yeah. So it's the thing.
I would have probably no problem with that. Are you also with natto?
No, what is natto?
Soybeans. There's natto. No. It's fermented soybeans, and it has many people think that it smells kind of like overused sweat socks, and it has a texture that is both sticky and slimy at the same time.
Oh boy, sticky and slimy. I mean,
Sticky
you can't beat that.
slimy. Exactly. I like it.
That's just twofer.
I've always liked it. It's supposed to be really good for your circulatory system, but I actually make my own natto because I like it that much.
I think I'm not gonna eat it.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll eat your share. It's very tasty.
Sticky and slimy.
Absolutely. So you talk a little bit about the idea of both the delusional progress and collapse in certain respects. You talk about it as a process, not as a thing that happens of overnight.
I also people. Let me just interject something. Everybody says collapse. The word the unspeakable word, we're getting into Lovecraft territory here. The word that causes that nobody will utter is the one I actually use, which is decline, not collapse. Decline,
yeah.
Note the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, a decline is a process for it. Collapse is
decline is a process. Collapse is an event. Decline is a process.
Mm-hmm.
We have this psychosis, and I think that extreme term is we have this psychosis in our modern world that the only possible futures that we have are endless progress up to the stars and beyond, even to infinity and beyond. That's one possibility. The other thing is absolute apocalyptic collapse that will wipe out everybody, and in fact, the planet itself will be a dust cloud next Thursday.
Right, and we're all going to be Morlocks, like living underground.
Or if the handful of survivors will be Morlock, mutant Morlocks with reptile scales on them or something. Yeah, it's just it's as though you turn on the weather, turn on the TV for the weather report, and there were two meteorologists, and one of them was saying that there's never going to be winter again. That the summer is going to be followed by uber summer, by uber summer, by uber summer, and the weather is just going to get more wonderful for the rest of time. And the other meteorologist is saying no, the ice age begins next Wednesday, and we all freeze to death. Okay,
right.
And that's the only weather they're willing to think about, when actually what's going to happen is that it's going to be 56 degrees and raining. Okay. And we have this bizarre delusion, this psychosis about the future that makes it impossible for people to notice that we've actually been in decline for the last 50 years.
In decline in what sense?
And 50 years ago, when I was in my teens, a working class family with one salary could afford a home, a car, 3 square meals a day, medical care, education. The list goes on. Maybe even have some luxuries. Today, a working class family of 4 with one income is living on the street. That's a gargantuan change. Nobody talks about it. It's a sign of decline. Go see if you can find color pictures from like Life magazine from the 1960s. American street scenes. Take a look what it looks like. Notice how clean they are. Notice the state of repair of the sidewalks. Then go outside. Walk through your own neighborhood. See what it looks like.
Right.
The decline is hard to miss. Actually, another thing you can do is listen to the people who are still rabbiting on as though Star Trek is anything new and exciting. Star Trek premiered in 1965?
Sure.
When cars had tail fins. When the Beach Boys were still a new outfit, and the Beatles, everyone thought they were has-beens. They were part of the British invasion, but we'd never hear from them again. And yet we're still chasing that same future as though it exists, when, in fact, we've been ratcheting down the slope ever since. Gasoline cost 17 cents a gallon in those days.
Well, sure. I mean, I get all that, but are we not on the cusp of going to Mars? Are we not on? We haven't had a human being outside low Earth orbit since 1973. Do you think there's a reason for that?
I think there are actually some very good reasons for that. One of the great discoveries that was made by the space probes of the 1970s is when you get out of Earth's magnetosphere, deep space is full of hard radiation. We have a huge thermonuclear reactor, unshielded, please note, at the center of our solar system. We call it the sun. It pumps out gamma rays and alpha, and just every imaginable kind of radiation is streaming out from it all the time. If you don't have a magnetosphere in the way, you're in the firing line. Mars doesn't have a magnetosphere, by the way.
No, it may not have one any longer. Let's say possibly
it may once have had one, but it certainly doesn't have one now. And if Elon Musk actually when you realize it took to get a handful of human beings across the whisker-thin gap between the Earth and the Moon, the U.S. had to put 15% of its national budget into that project for a decade. Okay. Now you want to know why we haven't gone to Mars. Going to Mars from here to the Moon is 3 days. From here to Mars is 9 months.
Sure.
Start thinking about what that's going to cost. It's the same reason why so many of our great technological breakthroughs haven't really broken through. Nuclear power is great. Nuclear power works. I mean, yes, you can make it technically work. You just can't make it affordable. And that's the example that we keep on running. That's the problem we keep on running against. Tomorrowland, nobody can pay the rent. And so that's another sign of decline. Yeah, we have cell phones. Okay. What else don't we have? Look at the crapification of products. Look at the debasement of our infrastructure. Look, it's if you look at the broad picture, we've been in decline for 50 years. And so I have made myself notorious and occasionally hated by pointing this out and noting that civilizations rise and fall. It's the most common thing about them. It's the most predictable thing about them. They follow a typical life cycle. We're on the downslope of this one. That doesn't mean the world's going to end next Thursday. It means that we need to start paying attention. If you're 50, you are never going to be 20 again. And it's important. It is useful for you to start taking that into account and begin planning on how you're going to handle your retirement and how you're going to handle declining health and what you're going to do to stay healthy and fit into old age, rather than just assuming that you'll be 20 forever. We need to do that as a society. That's what I've been saying for years. Now, not that anyone's listening, of course, other than a few cranks out here on the fringes where I hang out. But that's what I've been talking about here. That we are very much like those old guys who get their hair dyed to hide the gray and do a comb over to hide the bald spot, and buy a bright red sports car and go down to singles bars to try to pick up 18-year-old popsies to try to feel young again.
Yeah, very much so.
That's America today. The 65-year-old guy trying to pretend that he's still 20. He's still a 20-year-old football player.
Well, so what's the next step then? In other words, we're talking about magic. We're talking about attaining enlightenment, walking down paths, reincarnating, while at the same time, this particular matrix reality is in its long descent into some sort of collapse, where it's going to go.
This civilization, the civilization that we're used to, has peaked. It is declining. A couple of hundred years from now, it'll bottom out at a dark age, which will go on for 400 to 500 years, and the new civilizations will be born. This is normal. It's just part of the normal life cycle of human societies. It is also normal in the downslope for esoteric traditions to really kickstart themselves and to become a very, very, very major thing. Think of the way that Neoplatonist theurgy became, and the mysteries became such a big deal in the late Roman world. Okay? Or the way that in late Tang Dynasty China, you had esoteric Buddhism spreading all over the place. That's how it got to Japan. And so on and so on and so on. There are many, many other examples. That's one of the things that a declining civilization does, is it becomes a very fertile seedbed for esoteric spirituality. So one thing that we can do is pay attention to this and say, okay, hit the ground running. This is a time where we can build, we can do things, we can discover things, we can teach, get these traditions into as many hands as possible, so they will be passed on through the Dark Age to the ages that follow.
If you listen to Tim Hogan, I don't know if you know Tim.
No,
but he's a friend of ours. He's been on the show before. Him and Scott Walder have Secrets of the Templars show on Gaia Network.
Sweet.
Anyway, so Tim talks about the idea of Masonry being, now this is his theory, of course, Masonry being the remnants of what used to be an antediluvian religion. And the idea of Masonry is that it was there as a, as like a, a time capsule that would try to, if society were ever to break down, Masonry was there to basically safeguard the knowledge that would start society back up, which is an interesting idea. I'm not sure if I buy it 100%.
If we're going to do it again, we better get our act in. We better get our act in gear. Because right now Masonry is not well positioned to do that.
No, it's not. But it's not even well positioned to run a pancake breakfast, let alone save society.
Well, now that depends on your lodge. I know some lodges that do a very good job of running pancake breakfast.
Yes, well, fair enough. But that's that's more my gripe with the way that things are done inside and outside the fraternity. But
one of the things that Masonry can do is that it does teach a fairly effective way of organizing things. You'll notice the number of volunteer organizations that copy the lodge system from Masonry and from other lodge organizations such as the Oddfellows. When people actually use it and don't just bog down in the details, it could be a very efficient way of running organizations. And it may be that one of the things that could be done with it as I don't know whether this is happening in your jurisdiction, but here in Rhode Island, we're getting a lot of younger people these days, a lot of young guys.
That's great.
Well, the not especially huge lodge to which I belong, where I'm active right now, Rising Sun number 30. Let's see, we just brought in 3 new young men. We have 4 more in process.
Oh, wow.
And
that's great.
It's just by the way, all of them are interested in the esoteric side of Masonry. Not one of them is not utterly agog about that, which is fine because our lodge has a lot of younger members who are into that. So I think we can give them a good place to. And so I think there are other jurisdictions that are having that. As we get more younger people in, more younger men, we can teach them these organizational methods, ritual methods, and so on. And they can use those in lodge, but they can also use those in other organizations, both existing ones, such as the various Martinist orders, or newly founded ones. And that can be those can be organizational centers during a time of general decline and decay.
Yeah, absolutely. But what are we teaching them? I mean, what is it specifically that these things are going to foster?
When a lodge is healthy, it is a self-organizing democratic structure that can make decisions effectively and act on them. I know there are a lot of lodges that do not function properly, but I've seen it happen. And that's a very useful thing at a time when most people have forgotten the basic skills of democracy. Democracy is just a slogan, but actually, like using a simplified form of the rules of order, introducing debating and voting on proposals, setting up committees, having them report, all of the things that were evolved as basic democratic process back in the day. We still know how to do them, at least some of us do. And the rest of us can learn. That's an enormously valuable toolkit. I mean, the United States exists today because people back in the 1760s and 1770s picked that up from Masonry and applied it to the Committees of Correspondence and the Sons of Liberty and organizations like that, and organized something that ended up becoming a new country.
I believe that. I was talking about on a larger level, necessarily more outside the craft, like it kind of what is Western esotericism gonna? Because a lot of people talk about, and we have a friend who constantly talks about the decline of Western society and the fact that there's people, and I saw it even in the 90s. I mean, we got away from teaching Greek, teaching Latin in schools. Then even the history that we start to cover these days is very, very different. The degrees that people get and so on and so forth. and I'm not going to take necessarily a political stand because that's not what we do on the show, but like the idea of be anything you want to be and it's okay, and like let's not have any ethics or morals or regimentation in our lives. Let's just run around, kind of very I would say something that what's his name, the guy you mentioned previously through OTO and Crowley would probably espouse, saying just do whatever you want. It's all good.
My working guess is that if Aleister Crowley showed up today and looked around, he'd be horrified. I mean, it's one thing. So? I think so. I think it's one thing to say, "Oh, we should do whatever we wish," when you're an Edwardian Englishman who's been raised in the very strict, in a very strict religious environment, as he was, and he's always riffing off that background. Even when he's rebelling against it, to actually see what happens when you don't have that background, when it's just, hey, whatever you want, man. My guess is that Crowley would be appalled.
That's interesting. So, I mean, so you espouse a certain amount of regimentation is important. It's not all.
Well, I think it's
whatever you want.
Regimentation is not the word I would use for it.
Okay.
I think that structure. The opposite of one bad idea is another bad idea. And the opposite of tyranny is anarchy, and that's kind of where we are these days on a moral level. And so there's that midpoint between them. It is not that hard to recognize that some structure, some limits, some laws need to be in place so that people can live together in relative peace. And that's the basis that I think we need to start from. Start with that realization. Okay. We've tried the Victorian, button up your butt and never let anything out and reach the age of 50 and explode kind of attitude. We have tried the let it all hang out attitude that came into fashion in the 1960s. Neither one of them works. Most ages of Western history, people have found a more or less balanced place between those two extremes. And I think if we're going to salvage anything out of the current mess, and I think it's happening, that's that midpoint. I mean, the reason so many young men are finding there's a lot of young men these days are coming into the craft. A lot of young men are starting to come into churches also. They want structure. They want somebody to give them that kind of guidance, that kind of framework, that kind of moral instruction, because they feel the absence of that in their lives. And so where they're going, the rest of society will go over the course of the next couple of generations.
That's interesting, because if you look at society these days, I mean, you've got polarizing figures and such, but there's a pervasive nihilism that's out there that is very troubling to me personally.
I
talked to Dave about this because it's almost like soul sucking. It is. And it seems to be propounded by a certain amount of, and again, I don't want to get, we do have a show about conspiracy theories. Is it fair to say that there's something behind it? There's a driving force behind this thing?
There are, I would say there are driving forces. And the problem, the great problem with conspiracy theories is that people tend to assume there's only one. Conspiracy. We can have. I've done books on conspiracy theory in the past. Sometime if we can have another conversation sometime and just get into the history of conspiracies, because it's colorful. And the great lesson is that there's a lot of them, and they're usually fighting each other. Did you?
Well, that's good. At least.
Did you ever, by any chance, play? This is going to date me. The Steve Jackson Games Company had a game called Illuminatus. No, Illuminati. Illuminatus was the, and it was a.
Wait, this is nothing to do with Robert Anton Wilson, right?
It was partly inspired by Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea's marvelous trilogy, which I have and read and have it in the original edition because I bought it when it first came out.
Oh, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Nord. And, but it was partly inspired by that, of course. But basically, each player is a conspiracy. You're the Gnomes of Zurich, and I'm the Bavarian Illuminati, and he's the Flying Saucer pilots, and you each one is a conspiracy, and you're all trying to take over the world. And so you do it by taking over different groups. Somebody's, okay, I'm going to use my turn. I'm going to take over the Girl Scouts. Okay, I'm using my term. I'm taking over AT&T, and so on and so forth. And so it just turns into this. The rules include rules for cheating, by the way. This is a conspiracy theory game, of course. And expansion packs, including things like the orbital mind control lasers and things like that. It's enormous fun. But the great lesson that it teaches is that there are lots of conspiracies, and they're usually at each other's throats.
That is pretty cool.
And so,
I love it.
Are there things? Are there organized groups pushing the nihilism we're talking about? Of course, there are. Are there spiritual forces pushing this nihilism? Why, yes, I believe there are. Any occultist who does not believe in the existence of malign spiritual beings is clueless. Okay, there are spiritual, there are positive spiritual entities. There are also negative spiritual entities. We can even use words like demon to refer to some of these. Okay, and they exist. They're a reality, and depending on I don't happen to know anything about the OM, your particular Martinist branch. I know the one that I belong to has the material from the Eloquent of Martinez de Pasquale, and although that's not something that I will be taking up simply because it's not something that calls me. The work that initiates of that branch do to bind and banish maleficent spiritual beings is very important.
Yeah, I've heard about the idea of that being like a spiritual warfare, almost a priestly sort of.
Yes. That is something that the heirs of Martinez de Pasquale still very much practice, and I'm glad they do. It's not a work that's appropriate for me, but I'm very glad there are people who are doing it.
So Louis Claude de Saint Martin and later Pappas sort of steered away from that. OM is very pure in the idea of it being a path of the heart. It doesn't get into a Lucoen really at all. In fact, it makes a quite a separation. I realized that Martinez de Pasquale had that but I think you see Louis Claude moving away from it. Yeah.
I didn't happen to. Well, I do know that Louis Claude de Saint Martin took his own route, and some of the Martinist organizations, including the one that I'm affiliated with, that's kind of the core. But if you are after you are an SI, after you worked your way through the study and training program and received your SI initiation, if you then choose to, you can proceed to the Eloquent, or you can proceed to a non-Masonic version of the rectified right, which Willermosa's offshoot of Martinez.
Is that's not the CBCS? That's something else, right? I'm guessing.
No, that's the end of the CBCS that ended up outside of Masonry. Yes.
Interesting. CBCS at least in Masonry seems very. Number one, it's very there's only a couple of guys that are in it. I mean, it's super selective.
I know. It's become yet another club for past grandmasters.
Right. Exactly.
But the thing is, as Willermosa designed it, after you pass through the 3 Masonic degrees, there were a series of further degrees, of which CBCS is only one. I haven't taken it, but I've been told it's literally one of the most beautiful Christian initiatory degrees in existence. And then beyond that is the degrees of profess and ground profess, where you are initiated into a version of Martinez de Pasquale's teachings.
That is very interesting.
So there's a whole mess of stuff out there, and there's a lot of material, and some of the Martinist orders out there have ended up scooping up a range of other orders that are more or less flying in loose formation with them. The outfit that I belong to, for example, has ended up more or less affiliated with Arthur Edward Waite's version of the Golden Dawn, which the one branch that actually survived intact from the original order. And Waite Christianized it, and there's some interesting stuff there. But there's all kinds of things buzzing around out in the world, and all of them offer ways to pursue the spiritual path, the inner esoteric path, and each of them is better suited for some people and less well suited for others.
Yeah, for my point, and I can only speak for me, and if Dave can chime in on this too, I like keeping separate things separate sometimes. You know, I wanted to have the flavor of Martinism, and I'm glad that I have OM in the way that it is, because it just it espouses that purity of like, it's going to be the way of the heart. That's what we do here, right? You want to go do the other shit, go do the other shit. But like as of right now, you know, this is kind of I would never say that maybe in the future something else may not appeal to me, but this is really kind of ringing my bell.
This is what you want to work with right now, and that's great.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the reasons that I think it's important that there are various traditions out there, is that, again, people are called to the divine in different ways. People are called to work with the inner side of things through different paths. And sometimes we end up, you know, my life has been a matter of going kind of from one thing to another, not bouncing very quickly. I mean, I spent 20 years doing Golden Dawn stuff before I went on to anything else. But it has been a matter of, okay, master this. Okay, great. Now here's this other thing that's just been plopped in your lap. Do something with it, sucker.
Interesting.
And there are karmic issues involved there, of which I have some clue, and there are, you know, and things like that. But you know, some people are more fortunate in that they simply find their way to a kind of work that works for them, and they just buckle down and do it. My task, to some extent, in this life is I'm a dumpster diver. I go down the back alleys of Western civilization and flip open the dumpsters and find things that have been thrown away and pull them off and hose them off and get them working again. That's kind of my job, and that's kind of my job in this incarnation. I've done it to a significant number of groups at this point, and I'm gearing up for another. Maybe several.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm always just doing stuff like this.
What are you starting next, buddy?
Well, let's see. A lot of what I'm one of my major focuses right now is the Gnostic tradition that Richard du Palatin established around the Brotherhood of the Pleroma and Order of the Pleroma. I've arranged to get the transmission of the Order of the Pleroma. I have been initiated into the chivalric order of St. Michael and St. Raphael, which is connected to that, and received a couple of other initiations associated with that. And so I'm busy studying his work and his correspondence course, which I have a complete set of. And it's going to take some work. He was a very complex guy, but he had enormously useful things to teach. And I'm looking at this saying, okay, this can be passed on. I'm just not sure. I need to keep on working with it until 10 years from now I have a good solid grasp of it. And then it's a matter of how do I communicate it.
Well, that's the other thing, because, for instance, TMO, and I'm not beating them up, but when we stopped sort of having communion with them between OM and TMO when they decided to start having self-initiations where you could just be in the mirror and initiate yourself. And by the way, that's actually, I'm not going to say I totally disagree with that, because I know there's a reason why when you're doing mushrooms, you're not supposed to look in the mirror, because, the mirror work is a thing. There's no question that it's a thing. Whether it works under the rubric of Martinism and in order to initiate yourself in the way that works, I'm not buying that. I'm just not buying it. But
there are traditions that have to be passed on by personal contact. No question.
I believe that. I do.
There are other traditions that do not need to be passed on that way. And so, Martinism, I mean, the Martinist initiations were kind of a shock to me. I was like, whoa.
Really? Interesting.
Oh, yeah. Just in the sense of there's more here than I expected. And
much more. Much more, I think.
I'm not, exactly. Deep well. I'm not complaining. I was going, whoa, okay, I like that. But, there was a definite jolt in each of the degrees. And so, but that's something that has to be passed on in person. My consecration as a bishop, that was done in the time-honored fashion with the laying on of hands. Some of the other things that I have received have been done in a very personal. The Order of the Pleroma, that was also done by the laying on of hands, as it traditionally is.
How do you spell Pleroma?
Pleroma. It's the Gnostic word. Pleroma. 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 The fullness in Greek. But yeah, but there are other things that I have received that were passed on by, okay, here is a set of meditations and exercises. Do these for a year. and then do the self-initiation ritual. And the self-initiation ritual crackled because I'd done all the prep. I built up the necessary Zoth, and so it was, whoa, okay, that worked too, didn't it? So there are traditions you can pass on that way. And the material that I've
What are you doing with all these initiations for yourself? Are you opening up various aspects of yourself? Are you unlocking deeper mysteries within your body?
Well, it depends. It depends on the ritual. It depends on the tradition, because different traditions have work on various different levels of being. Most of what I am doing at this point, I mean, my personal practice is still very largely based on the material I received from John Gilbert. And so I have my practices. I'm doing that's my work for me, and that's about an hour a day. Okay.
Oh wow.
And it is, that's normal. And then, but the thing is, a lot of the other things that I'm doing, that's karma. That's an issue of somebody needs to pull the stuff from the gutter. Somebody needs to pick the stuff up and do something with it. Somebody needs to pass this on to others. There are things that I've received that I've done almost nothing with, but it was a matter of, okay, I need to get this because I have a clear sense, and my divinations show me there's going to be someone else down the road who really, really needs this. And that someone else has come along, sometimes a couple of years later, and I've had this and I've been able to pass it on. They're just going, whoa, this is exactly what I've always wanted. Yeah, okay, take it and run with it.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
I am also not slow to step down from titled positions. I spent 12 years as Grand Archdruid of the Ancient Order of Druids in America. Now, that and 350 will get you a cup of coffee. Actually, 650 these days. But
you mustn't be known far and wide as Grand Archdruid.
Actually, a lot of people still refer to me as the Archdruid, even though I'm not. I haven't been. It's been 10 years now. It'll be 10 years.
Do you have to live in a large tree or something and communicate with anyone?
I would have enjoyed that. I think I would have enjoyed that. But
that would have been awesome.
But no, I did my 12 years, and I stepped down. And the hilarious thing was that all over some of the less some of the less reputable corners of the Druid community, people were saying, no way, he couldn't possibly have done that, because they couldn't imagine stepping down from that kind of position, too much ego investment or something. But yeah, I've stepped down.
Now you've hit on the main problem with all of these organizations.
It would be one thing if they actually had some kind of grandeur to their egomania. Somebody who's going, I am going to be the Lord of the universe and conjure up, archangels to serve me. It's stupid, but there's at least some grandness. No, these are people who want these exalted titles so they can parade them around 15 people online. And talk about how cool they are.
You see that in Masonry. There's all kinds of people that,
sad.
They'll tap you on the shoulder, and next thing you know, you're in some hotel room with a fog machine or something, or some other sort of light show or whatever they've got going on. By the way, I don't talk badly about fog machines, because they use that Nazim grotto for one of the for the initiation into grotto, which was awesome and psychedelic and fun and really cool.
I have not done grotto yet. I have a friend who's trying to bring me in, and I will see if I can make time for that. But I have not done grotto yet.
If you can, you should join Nazim, because it's a lot of fun. It'll get you down into Manhattan here and there.
Well, you would think that a Druid would find New York City uncomfortable. I don't. I like it. I haven't. I've been there. I've been in New York City like 3 times in my life, and once for a speaking gig, once actually for a book release party. One of my Lovecraftian novels is actually set in the Red Hook district of Brooklyn, and because cool. Lovecraft put a story there, so that was the story I stood on its head and had fun with, and then once to do some weight version GD initiations, and had a grand time. I like New York City. I'm very comfortable with New York City. Don't ask me why.
There's a lot to recommend it. It is one of the most amazing cities in the world. So just the fact that we're anywhere near it is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. But
how close are you to how close are you to it? Right. I don't know New Jersey geography at all.
Without traffic, 20 minutes. With traffic, an hour and a half.
Okay,
so
I'll take the train. There are reasons why I don't drive, and I like places with decent train service. And so here, I can get to Boston easy in half the time it takes anybody in a car.
Oh, absolutely. But listen, we've hit the 2-hour mark, and we know that we want to be cognizant of your time, and we greatly appreciate you being on the show.
I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, we've enjoyed chatting with you without doubt. And is there anything that you want to say, or Dave, do you have any questions before we wrap up? Since you've been talking the whole time, so come on. I mean, it's
John, what would you say? Since we've been in decline of civilization, what are you most hopeful about for humanity's spiritual path going forward, and what concerns you most?
Okay. What I'm most hopeful, what gives me the most hope right now is that it is easier to get access to spiritual teachings than it has ever been at any point in recorded history. Whether by publishing, by the internet, fill in the blank. If you want esoteric teaching, you can get it. And many people are taking advantage of that. I've found the most astonishing range of people who are up to their eyeballs studying ancient Egyptian occultism, or they're into this kind of esoteric Buddhism, or they've gone to Taiwan and received some level of Taoist ordination, or busy practicing the lesser and greater circulations of light and the esoteric end of Tai Chi, or they've gotten Golden Dawn training and they're doing that. There's a lot of people out there who are doing a lot of really interesting, really creative, potentially very useful work. And as we continue surfing the wave of decline, if that continues, I think it could bring a lot of light to the Dark Ages and mean that there's some very rich spiritual traditions coming out of that for the benefit of the successor societies in the future. What concerns me is that you have that. And then because we have so many substitutes for thinking right now, with perhaps television is the first of the lot, there are so many people who have become so very mechanical in their lives, so very mechanical in their minds. There's not a lot of human there at this point. And I'm wondering what's going to happen to them as the technostructure winds down. E.M. Forster, the author, writing in 1909, wrote a story called The Machine Stops. And it's about the internet in 1909. Forster predicted that. And it's about what happens when this vast integrated technostructure stops working quite so well. It's harrowing. And so there's a lot of people who are kind of blundering blindly toward that. And that could lead to some really nasty disruptions down the road if we don't get more people who are willing to, turn off the damn phone, disconnect from the internet, and if it's just to spend 30 minutes of spiritual practice a day coming to terms with what's actually real, rather than spending all their lives interacting with, mediated, managed little blobs of color that are dancing jerkily through patterns on a glass screen.
Now he's talking about porn. Yeah, I think
we don't even have to get into that. But that's one example. We have sexual porn, but we have every other kind of porn. Everything you look at on a screen.
Oh, food porn, all kinds of absolutely.
Food porn, travel porn, social interaction porn. You name it. Everything's mediated. Everything's available in this kind of ersatz fakery of little jerky images on a glass screen, and people think that's real. And that's
freaking profound, dude.
That's a trap. That's a trap that's eating a lot of people. But all you have to do, that's one of those situations where damnation is voluntary. You can just not only turn off your phone, but stick it in the drawer and go for a walk. Okay, how's that for shocking?
That is shocking.
That's shock and awe right there.
Yeah,
absolutely. And anything you want to say that we haven't touched on that you want to discuss about?
I think I've rabbited on at great length about several of my pet peeves and serious interests. And anyone wants to follow me online, my blog is ecosophia.net, ecosophia.net. And
we will put that in the bio. Yeah.
I also have a Dreamwidth journal at ecosophia.dreamwidth.org. My books are available at third-rate bookstores. Anyway, actually, if you have a local bookstore, go in and ask. They can order it for you, and it will make their day. They will also order extra copies, which will make my day.
Absolutely. That would be pretty cool, too. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank
John,
you very much for having me on.
You're an incredible guy and a brother, and we thank you. Until next time, this is Brothers of the Arcana, and I am Alex Aldea.
I'm your co-host, Dave Ferrigno. Thank you for joining. Right. God bless.
And we'll see you next time. Take care.